Welcome to The Cellar. Welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's story, I want to give you all a quick reminder. If you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please consider subscribing and turn the notifications on so that you never miss a new upload. Also, I would really appreciate it if you all checked out my brother's new YouTube channel. He just began his YouTube journey, and his channel is called Journey with J Bear. You can find his channel linked below in the description box, or you can simply type youtube.com/@journeywithj-bear. With that said, let's not waste any more time and dive into today's story.
Country roads, take me home to the place I belong, West Virginia. Oh, mountain mama, Lord, take me home. Country roads.
Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., or better known under his stage name, John Denver, was born on December 31, 1943, in Roswell, New Mexico. Roswell is a city located in the southeastern section of New Mexico and has a population of around 48,000 current residents. For many, Roswell is best known as being the site of an alleged 1947 UFO crash. John Denver was born to parents Irma Louise and Captain Henry John Dutch Deutschendorf Sr. John's father Henry was a United States Army Air Force pilot that was stationed at the Roswell Army Airfield at the time he was born. His father was highly decorated and dedicated his life to the military. At home, you could say John Denver's life was tumultuous. His father was a very stern man, and it's said he wasn't one to show a lot of love towards his children. Due to his father's career in the military, the family moved rather frequently, which made it difficult for John to ever get settled and make friends within school. John would embrace music at a very young age. At only 11 years old, his grandmother would gift him an acoustic guitar. He would devote a lot of time into learning how to play, and by the time he graduated from high school, he began performing in local clubs. John Denver would attend college at Texas Tech University, where he was studying architecture. While there, he joined a folk music group, and his dream of being a musician only continued to grow. In 1963, he made the decision to drop out of college and move to California, fully committing himself to his musical dream. He would eventually join a band, but in 1969, John Denver decided to pursue a solo career. His first album, Rhymes and Reason, would be released in October of 1969 through RCA Records. The song, Leaving on a Jet Plane, would eventually make it to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. But the real success would come in 1971, when John released his second album, Poems, Prayers, and Promises. The song many of you know him for, Take Me Home, Country Road, was released as a single and eventually went all the way to number 2 on the Billboard charts. John Denver's career was in full swing throughout the 1970s. In the middle of this all, John and his estranged father would find common ground in flying. John's father would begin teaching him, and the time spent together would bring the pair closer than they ever had been. Jumping ahead, John Denver would get married for a second time in 1988. He married Australian actress Cassandra Delaney after 2 years of dating. The pair would settle into John's home in Aspen, Colorado, where they had a daughter together named Jessie Bell. This second marriage for John didn't go as he had hoped in the end. By 1991, the pair separated, and in 1993, they officially divorced. John was later quoted as saying, "In our short-lived marriage that ended in divorce, she succeeded in making a fool out of me across the entire valley." Following his failed marriage, John's life went through a pretty rocky patch. In 1993, Denver pled guilty to a drunk driving charge and was officially placed on probation. In August of 1994, he was once again charged with misdemeanor driving under the influence after crashing his Porsche into a tree in Aspen. He was still on probation at the time. John Denver would go to court in July of 1997. The charge he was facing was in regards to the second DUI incident. Ultimately, the trial would end in a hung jury. This now brings us to October of 1997. John Denver, at this point in his life, had released 11 albums that were certified platinum by the RIAA. This makes him one of the most successful recording artists of the 1970s. His successful music career helped him find success within film and television as well. When John wasn't playing music or acting, you could typically find him devoting time into flying. John Denver was a well-accomplished private pilot, with more than 2,700 hours on various single and multi-engine aircraft, with both an instrument and a Learjet rating. To put it simply, he had a lot of experience. On the afternoon of October 12, 1997, John Denver prepped for a flight in his new experimental light home-built aircraft, a Rutan Long Easy. John had recently purchased the aircraft as it was made by someone else from a kit. As far as this particular aircraft, John was not overly familiar with it. To give a little more context, the Rutan Model 61 Long-EZ is a tandem two-seater home-built aircraft designed by Burt Rutan's Rutan Aircraft Factory. The Long-EZ has a canard layout and a swept wing with wingtip rudders and a pusher engine and propeller. The tricycle landing gear has fixed main wheels with streamlined spats and a retractable nose wheel. At the time, in October of 1997, this particular plane had been responsible for 61 accidents, 19 of which were fatal. I also dove a little bit more into this particular aircraft and found that as of 2023, 114 Long-EZ aircrafts have been lost in accidents, with 44 total fatalities. John Denver would continue his flight prep at the Monterey Peninsula Airport. Soon he was ready to go and he would take off. The first thing he did was perform 3 consecutive touch-and-go landings. A touch-and-go landing is a flight training maneuver that allows pilots to practice landing and taking off techniques in a short amount of time. This helps pilots improve their aircraft control, judgment, and operational procedures. Following his third touch-and-go, John Denver's plane took off into the sky, heading out over the Pacific Ocean. All appeared normal at first, until just moments after takeoff, John Denver's plane took a nosedive straight into the waters of Monterey Bay. The plane would break up instantly, leaving no chance that anyone could survive. Emergency services and rescue teams would report to the area as they looked to recover John and what was left of his plane. The large looming question being, what happened? Now, no one truly knows exactly what went down. There are theories, with some believing that John made the decision to take his own life on that fateful day. Could that be the case? It's possible. You can't know how John was feeling in that particular moment. But soon, the investigation would begin, and for some, answers would be found. First and foremost, John Denver was not legally licensed to fly that plane at the time of his death. In 1996, close to a year prior, the FAA had been informed that John Denver had failed to maintain sobriety. Following this revelation, they revoked his medical certification. Now, John Denver's body was recovered, piece by piece. Following a full autopsy, toxicology results would conclude that John was not under the influence at the time of his crash, so alcohol was not a factor. Ultimately, the National Transportation Safety Board would perform a full post-crash investigation. After countless interviews with those around John prior to the crash, they concluded that this was just a horrible, horrible accident. Prior to takeoff, John did not refuel his plane. Now, this wouldn't be a big deal, but prior to takeoff, John knew there was an issue with the plane's ability to switch fuel tanks during flight. Now, typically on this type of plane, the fuel tank selector valve handle would be located between the legs of the pilot, but the prior builder of the plane had placed it behind the pilot's left shoulder. To add to it all, the fuel gauge itself was also placed behind the pilot's seat, meaning whoever was flying the plane could not see the gauge. Prior to his final flight, John and his mechanic had discussed these issues. Not only was the fuel selector handle in a terrible place, but it was also resistant to being turned. In order for a pilot of the plane to switch between fuel tanks, they would have to turn their body a full 90 degrees. Doing this would cause the pilot of the plane to extend their right foot against the right rudder pedal to support oneself while turning around within the seat. Now, to solve the fuel gauge itself, the mechanic set up a mirror for John to use in order for him to get a glimpse of the gauge. The pair also tried to use vice grip pliers on the fuel selector handle, but according to the mechanic, it did not help. John Denver's plan was that he would use the autopilot in flight to hold the airplane level while he turned the fuel selector valve. He ultimately turned down an offer to refuel the aircraft. At the time, he stated that he would only be flying for about an hour and didn't believe it was necessary. In the end, many believe that if he simply had refueled, this tragedy would not have occurred. At the end of the day, no one else besides John Denver was in the cockpit on that fateful day. Was this tragic accident just that, an accident? Or could John have made the decision to leave this world while doing something he loved, flying? Some believe the latter, as some pilots don't believe that the strange valve placement would have been enough for John Denver to steer himself into a nosedive. George Rutan, the recreational pilot and father of the plane's designer, was quoted as saying, "To get the nose down like that, you have to be real purposeful." Some believe what happened to John Denver was darker than any tragic accident. While I think, based on the facts laid out, this all being a tragic accident is the most likely. From my research, these planes have resulted in numerous deaths over the years. Add to that the terrible placement of the fuel selector handle and the added difficulty of being able to even view the fuel gauge itself. Also add on John's unfamiliarity with this particular aircraft, and it all screams accident, at least in my book. So now, I ask all of you what you think. Was John Denver's death a tragic accident, or was it something else altogether? At the end of the day, John Denver's legacy continues to carry on long after his passing. His music touched many lives, and it will continue to do so. As always, I would like to send my deepest condolences to all of John's family, friends, and to the many fans of his timeless music. Paul William Walker IV was born on September 12, 1973, in Glendale, California. His mother, Cheryl Crabtree, was a fashion model, while his father, Paul William Walker III, was a sewer contractor and former two-time Golden Glove amateur boxer. Paul Walker was raised within the Mormon religion and had 4 younger siblings, Amy, Ashley, Caleb, and Cody. Mormons are a religious and cultural group related to Mormonism, the principal branch of the Latter-day Saint movement started by Joseph Smith in upstate New York during the 1820s. Paul spent most of his young life within the Sunland neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. He would go on to graduate from high school at Village Christian School in 1991. Following high school, Paul attended numerous community colleges, majoring in marine biology at the time. With his mother already being a model, Paul first began modeling himself at only 2 years old, first starring in a television commercial for Pampers diapers. Over the years, he would continue to pop up in commercials before beginning an acting career on television in 1984. His first role was in the teen anthology series CBS School Break Special. From there, he would continue to pop up in TV shows before landing his first leading role in 1987. He starred as a character named Jeremy Beatty in the sitcom Throb. Paul would go on to act in sitcoms throughout the 90s. He scored some B-film roles in the mid to late 80s, and as the 90s progressed, he acted in a handful of more films. 1998 to 2000 was when Paul started to make a name for himself, scoring supporting roles in films like Pleasantville in 1998, Varsity Blues in 1999, She's All That in 1999, and The Skulls in 2000. These roles were all good for his career, but 2001 would be the year he truly broke through, in the role that you all know him for, as Brian O'Connor in the very first Fast and Furious film. Following his breakout role, he went on to star in films like one of my personal favorites, Joyride, and he earned himself a spot in the Too Fast, Too Furious sequel. Paul would garner more roles over the years and was eventually approached to reprise his role as Brian O'Connor in Fast and Furious, the 4th film in the franchise. Brian had not returned for the third film, Tokyo Drift, and was very reluctant to return to the character for a third time. He ultimately would agree to return, and it's easy to say that it was a good decision, as Fast and Furious also brought back characters from the very first film, most notably Vin Diesel. The film would go on to become the highest-grossing film in the franchise at the time. Paul Walker would ultimately go on to star in 3 more films within the franchise, turning the Fast and Furious brand into an absolute cinematic juggernaut. In his personal life, Paul had a daughter named Meadow Rain Walker with his on and off again girlfriend Rebecca Soteros. Rebecca and Meadow both lived together in Hawaii for 13 years before Meadow made the decision to move to California and live with Paul. Paul and Vin Diesel had become extremely close friends over the years, to the point that Paul would ask Vin to be his daughter's godfather. In his free time, Paul trained jiu-jitsu, and after years of training had reached the status of brown belt. He was also a complete car enthusiast. Being involved in the Fast and Furious franchise was a bit of a dream for him, as he loved cars, and being involved in the films only further grew that love. Paul Walker owned Always Evolving, a Valencia high-end vehicle performance shop. The shop had their own AE Performance racing team, and Paul would end up competing in the Red Line Time Attack Racing Series. There, he drove a BMW E92 M3. Paul's love of cars was ever growing over the years. It's said that he amassed a pretty large collection of around 30 different vehicles. With all that said, we will now venture to November 30th, 2013. Paul Walker and Roger Rodas were attending a charity event called Winter Drive in Santa Clarita, California. Winter Drive was marketed as an automotive event and toy drive. Paul's charity, Reach Out Worldwide, was one of the main organizers of the event, which was being held for victims of Typhoon Haiyan. To give a little more context, Roger Rodas was a pro-AM racer. He was also the CEO of Paul's performance shop and a very close friend. At around 3:30 p.m. that afternoon, Walker and Rodas climbed into a red 2005 Porsche Carrera GT. Rodas was behind the wheel at the time, and soon the pair pulled out and left the event. Now, this particular car has a top speed of 330 kilometers an hour, or around 205 miles per hour. Based on performance testing, the car can go from 0 to 80 kilometers an hour, or 0 to 50 miles per hour in around 2.61 seconds. There's a reason Sports Car International named the Carrera GT number 1 on its list of top sports cars of the 2000, and number 8 on its top sports cars of all time list. With Rodas behind the wheel, the pair sped away from the charity event. They would pull out and take an immediate right, following the road down a little ways before hanging another right. They would enter a straight stretch of road that was marked as being a 45 mile per hour or 72 kilometer an hour speed zone on Hercules Street in Valencia. Rodas would put his foot into the throttle a little more, taking the car to upwards of 80 to 93 miles per hour or around 130 to 150 kilometers per hour. The road ahead would bank slightly to the right. Rodas would keep his foot on the gas as the turn would straighten out. Coming off that turn, Rodas would lose control. Rodas would try to correct the car, but this was no racetrack. There wasn't much room for error on this street, and before Rodas could correct, the car struck a lamppost and 2 trees. The vehicle instantly burst into a ball of flames. Emergency officials would arrive on scene, but there was absolutely nothing they could do for either of the men. The car was absolutely destroyed, and both men were burned beyond recognition. Following a full investigation into what happened, it was determined that both men were knocked out during impact. They believe Rodas died instantly from multiple physical traumas suffered. Paul Walker is believed to have perished within seconds from the combined effects of the physical trauma he suffered and burns. Looking further into what went wrong, I found in my research that the 2005 Porsche Carrera GT can be difficult to drive due to its lack of electronic stability control. The car was also being driven with 2 9-year-old tires. It is likely that these tires had become overcured and hard over time. Now, these are all reasons why people believe Rodas lost control, but ultimately, the answer, at the end of the day, is excessive speed. Rodas was a racer, and it's clear he felt comfortable enough to drive the car at dangerously high speeds when he shouldn't have been. I'm not going to preach about excessive speeding, but at the end of the day, there's one silver lining, and that is that no one else was in the way of that car on that fateful day. Paul's death was a heartbreaking one to his family, friends, and the millions of fans he had garnered over the years. At the time, he was in the middle of filming Furious 7, and the production would end up going on hiatus. They ultimately were able to use Paul's brother, who looks a lot like him, to fill in some scenes and complete the film. If you've ever seen the end of Furious 7, it is a very touching and beautiful tribute to the late Paul Walker. For me, that's the day the Fast and Furious franchise came to an end. It simply hasn't been the same without Paul Walker. In the end, if there's anything we can learn from these stories, it's that life is fragile. So hold your loved ones close, never go to bed angry, and live each day to its fullest. As I always like to do here at the end, I want to send my condolences to not only Paul Walker's family and friends, but to Rodas's family and friends. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode. If you enjoy the content, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps the channel continue to grow. It's also very important that you hit the notification bell and turn on notifications, as you may not be alerted of my uploads if you don't do so. In the description box below, you will find a link to my merch store and a link to the Cellar Dwellers membership tier for the channel. If you're interested, please take a moment to check those things out. If you'd like to submit your own scary story or a story recommendation, you can do so using the email linked in the description box below. As always, I do all the research, writing, recording, and editing for the channel myself, so anything that you do to support this channel is greatly appreciated. Until next time, I will see you all again as we head back into the cellar.